Hi everyone, welcome to TechHub.training. My name is Jacob, and today we're going to be going over the Power BI Payroll Pain Challenge solution. So in this challenge, we're given 3 CSVs, and we're asked to see if anyone has been overpaid or if anyone has been paid after their termination date. So to get started, we're going to create a new Power BI document. We're going to import all of these CSVs. So just go up to here, get data, text CSV. We'll start to import each one of these. Great, so now we have all 3 of our tables loaded in. The first one is employee data. This is just the employee's name, their address, and other things about them. This is a fake data set, that's why we have some fake addresses in here. But the column we're going to be focusing on in this table is the hourly wage and also the termination date. With those, we can kind of determine what we need to do with regards to if anybody's been overpaid or if anybody was paid after they were let go. Employee hours, this is just the employee hour log and payroll export. So the next step in this challenge is to find if anyone has been overpaid, and we can do this by first joining these 2 tables together. We could have done that back in Power Query Editor, but we can also do it here. So if we go into employee hours, we're going to create a calculated column that's going to be our primary key. So what we can do is we can join these 2 columns together with a DAX measure. All right. So we'll just join their employee ID. I'm going to put a dash in between the employee ID and the period start or period end date. That's not necessarily required. Great, so we can use this as a calculate or as a primary key to join with payroll export. The reason why we do this is so that there's a unique row for each employee ID and each pay period end. So we know that this new column will correspond exactly with a column in payroll export. I'm just going to add some spaces between the dash and the numbers. We'll call this ID and period end. That looks great. We'll go do the same thing for payroll export. Great. Now that we have these 2 columns created, we could go over to our model view. All right, now that we're in our model view, we can see that Power BI has already created a few relationships for us. This relationship we're going to want to replace. So Power BI will look at the fields you have in your tables and try and create relationships. This one down here is actually correct. In the next step, we want to join employee ID on employee ID between these 2 with a one-to-many relationship, so we'll just leave this one how it is. But here we could delete this relationship, and we'll create a new one. All right, right here, we're going to join on ID and period end on both tables with a one-to-one relationship. So these 2 tables, because there's a one-to-one relationship in here, they could be combined. So that's why I was saying earlier at the very beginning, you can combine them in Power Query Editor, but this way works just as well. Great. Now we have all the relationships created that we need, so we could go on to solving the problem. So back in our payroll export table, we have this gross pay, deductions, and net pay. What we're going to want to do is recalculate what their gross pay, their deductions, and their net pay would be if we just use data from their hours that they've worked and also their pay rate and employee data. To do this, let's first bring in their hours worked. So this related function looks at the relationship between this table and this table and the other table and allows us to bring in the column that we want. So we can see how many hours they worked. Let's do the same thing with their wage. So now that we have their hours worked and their wage, we can multiply these together to get the gross pay. And then after we get the gross pay, we can take out the taxes withheld. And with that, we can calculate their net pay. So we'll just multiply these 2 columns together that we created. right, now that we have their gross pay, we can find the taxes that would be withheld with another column. We're assuming that everybody has 15% withheld for this challenge. All right, and now we could just subtract taxes withheld from calculated gross pay. Great, and now that we have their calculated net pay, we could compare this with the net pay given to us in the payroll export to see if anybody was overpaid. So we'll just create one more new column. We'll subtract the net pay from the calculated net pay. Or if we do it the other way around, we can look for any large positive numbers. So we'll go calculated net pay, subtract their net pay. Great, we could see these variances. These all look really small. Let's reformat it so we can see if anything is worth looking at. So let's just look at 2 decimal places. And we'll sort biggest to smallest. So it looks like there are no issues with anyone being overpaid. There's all these 1 cent issues. That's just due to calculations or rounding errors. But it looks like everybody's being paid what they should be paid, which is great. So now we can move on to the next part of this problem, which is finding out if anyone was paid after their termination date. So to do this, we can bring in their termination date because we created that relationship. So we'll create another calculated column. We'll use this related function again, bring in this termination date. So now with this termination date in here, we can check to see if anyone was paid after this date. We'll create a new calculated column and call it paid after termination. So to start this formula, we can just check if the termination date is blank or not. So we could say if is blank termination date. If it's blank, we're going to just return a null string. And if not, we can move on with the rest of our formula. All right, so we determined termination date is not blank. We could check if it is after the payroll period end date. So we'll say if termination date, or we'll say if is after pay period end dot date. And then termination date. We will return true. And if not, false. All right, let's double check our work. Their termination date was 1/1/2024. And they were terminated in 2023. So these are all looking good. Let's check this one, true. They were terminated 1/1/2024. And they were paid in March of 2024. So it looks like our formula is working correctly. So let's just look at our formula again, make sure that it makes sense. So we're saying if the termination date is blank, return nothing. If it's not blank and termination date is after pay period end, return true. And if it's not after, return false. So that makes sense. So now what we can do is we can filter this to see everybody that's true. All right, so it just looks like employee ID 4 is the only employee that's been being paid after termination date. We can go look at our employee data, see who's number 4, and that's Caitlin Avery. So the solution to this challenge is Caitlin Avery, and no one was overpaid. Thank you guys for participating. Please comment below your solutions and join us again on TechHub.